Hello, everyone. Welcome to office hours. At least here in Boston, it's very gray, and we had a very nice 6-second long bit of thunder this morning. So it was very exciting. None of my windows broke, so great. Anyhow, welcome, everyone. Let's see, announcements. Obviously, the big one is that we shipped 5.01 last office hours or so that's pretty exciting. And at least from what I've seen, it's been pretty anticlimactic. Talk about that down in the agenda. I don't know if anyone else has any announcements they'd like to share. Okay. Next up is kind of a low-key section for any random questions people want to ask that maybe they didn't think merited an agenda item, but if anyone wants to ask about something, bring up a PR, now's a great time.
Did we want to talk about the PID file PR from Alessandro?
Yeah, we have this pull request that fixes how the PID file works. In master, there's a chance that you will encounter a race condition that allows you to open multiple instances of the watcher process. So this new implementation uses log files to make sure it doesn't happen anymore, but it would be nice to have a code review from someone that is not 12 bits.
I can try and read it. That might be better for Zach or Teddy, because probably ideally a C-oriented code review. Maybe not. Like the theory all sounds great to me. I wonder if you want like a hardcore C developer on that.
I wouldn't describe myself as a hardcore C developer these days, but I can take a look.
It's not like
I think Teddy would probably be
the
best, or Stefano.
I mean, as far as C goes,
but I can take a look for sure.
Thank you, Zach. Do you want me to like tag you on this one or something?
Oh no, I'll look.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually I also have a pull request up. Let me see. I should have done this sooner. Yeah, so I have this pull request for BPF. That fixes how strings are captured. So the main issue there is that when capturing strings or buffers, the memory may not be there. By switching when things are captured from the enter to the exit, it is more likely that the buffers are there. There are still some issues reported in the linked issue about the execve system call. However, there's nothing we can do for that. We are forced to capture the strings when we enter the system call, because when we exit the execve, the memory address space is changed and the string is no longer there. So occasionally you will see the malformed event error when there's a page fault. There's not really much else we can do. In theory, newer kernels are more reliable, but it's not a strong guarantee.
Is there a way we can either capture it or just emit a more clear error? Like it sounds like this is an expected condition, so something like malformed sounds very unexpected and like there's some bug, right? I don't know if we can just put more words there so we're less likely to see someone file an issue about it.
Yeah, sure. I can maybe update the documentation and also maybe change the error.
Yeah. I don't know if it makes sense in this PR or another one. Okay. Moving on.
Still BPF. There are some memory issues there. We know where they are. We're going to fix them next. Should have some time tomorrow to look into it.
Not to put you in the hot seat or anything, do you have a guess on like a timeline? Is that like a days or weeks or months kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely not months or weeks. Maybe a couple of days.
Okay, so probably we'll see that before 5.1 then.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion about that one? I see the people who care strongly about it appear to be here. I don't know if they want to say anything or if they just were hoping to make sure it didn't get lost.
We were just wanting to make sure like there's a known thing or whether we were doing something wrong on our end. So if it's a known thing and it's going to be fixed, that's awesome. Matt, I don't know if you had anything to add.
Are we specifically talking about the memory usage thing? Like the ever increase? Okay. Yeah.
I think so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, if that sort of is going to kind of, that's a kind of a bug sort of thing going on then. I'm sorry. Like, I mean, I had some questions about like the events expiry flag, and I mean, just like some of the testing we've been doing. But if it's operating like in a kind of an unexpected fashion at the moment, then
yeah, it's definitely a bug.
Okay, cool.
Not related to the events.
Yeah, what we're seeing is, like we said, events expiry to 1 second, and we're running queries against a host, and we're just seeing the watchdog. It keeps growing in memory. Watchdog kills it, grows in memory. Watchdog kills it. My understanding is that with events expiry, it's like the retention of events that it keeps in memory as a query is like. But then when a query's run, it flushes the events table. This is me just not knowing how Osquery works.
But let's separate some things for a moment. Y'all are encountering an eBPF memory leak, or a leak in the eBPF processing routines library. I don't know. Alessandro wrote that, and he said he'll take a look at it. So that sounds wonderful. And separately, you're also asking about Osquery and the events, which is totally cool. All happy to talk about that. I just want to make sure that we communicate they're separate.
Yes, it seems clear now. We were basically trying to work through, trying to see if this was something that's configurable, and sort of being kind of mystified by the behavior of it. But it seems like, there's some sort of bug going on or something.
And Matt, to be clear, the events expiry wouldn't be covering events that are stored in memory. That would be events that are stored in RocksDB, which is written to disk. I mean, they'd be stored in memory at some point.
Okay, so that's just another part where I need to like understand how Osquery actually works.
Yeah, we could take a few minutes and talk about that.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about it.
Yeah.
So
it's a terrible bug that I wrote. So sorry about that. I'm going to fix it.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's just that helps.
And yeah, Matt, when thinking about the event expiry, that will apply to every event-based table. And it's basically like how long do the buffered events stay around in the buffer such that any queries can access them. And the place where it really matters is if, say, you have multiple queries against the same event-based table, you want to make sure that each one of those queries gets to see the whole buffer of events before the oldest ones are discarded. So really, you tune that if you have concerns where you're noticing like the Osquery DB on disk is growing quite large or something like that. But typically the default values, will work all right and not allow the DB to grow super big.
I kind of also maybe want to step back slightly. You mentioned trying to understand how Osquery works here. And one of the things that the way I think about Osquery is it's not really a database. It looks like a database, but it's not a database.
And that's how we went. Like the initial idea is like it's a you turn your computer into a database.
I think it is best described as an API translation layer. So, and this is, I think, important to think about and understand is when you do something like select star from processes, right? What's actually happening is the Osquery is, something somewhere under the hood that gets to a SQLite table implementation, and the table implementation says, "I'll go hit a system API." It basically runs PS and massages the output and then hands it back. So it's sort of translating a SQL API to a systems API. So there is no like, oh, let me connect to my running Osquery and like query the database. It's more like every time you run an Osquery I shell or an Osquery D shell, you basically just are hitting an API translation layer. There are some very big caveats here, though, which is that events are totally different.
Yeah, I was about to say right.
So as Zach's alluding to, the way, and Zach will know all of this better than I will, but I can maybe give you a quick overview, right? Is that when you So if you imagine your processes, right, and then the first thing you're like is, oh, I want to know if this malware ever runs, right? I really want to know when a user runs ls, right? And you're like, oh, well, if I run, select star from processes, I'm only getting that instantaneous snapshot, and you can get into like, well, how often do you have to sample that to try and get that? And like, you can't, right? It's a non-starter. So then you end up needing to look at subscription-based APIs, right? So a variety of tables support evented APIs, right? So OSs have like audit trails, right? And you can just, Osquery knows how to talk to them. And under the hood, that is actually much closer to a database. So if the scheduled queries include something that is evented, it will spin up a subscriber, follow the OS evented API, populate an internal RocksDB based on that, purge it out based on those settings, that you probably don't have to touch. And then those queries, if you run select star from process events, you're basically hitting the internal cache of what came out of process events. And there's a bunch of tracking around, like if you run it twice, you don't want overlapping stuff. You just want like the new stuff, right? So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of like stuff around publishers and subscribers, and a lot of that is kind of just hidden behind this abstraction of as soon as you query an event-based table, it'll spin up a subscriber, start subscribing to the events. Osquery will spin up a publisher, which consumes the OS and publishes into RocksDB. And then when you query against Osquery, it will read them out of the RocksDB. So that's much more like a database.
That part I got a little lost on. Just this dynamic here where the act of querying actually starts populating events. My sort of thinking on this was that at runtime at startup, Osquery, like we see the BPF, sockets and processes, events tables. We haven't worked with events tables at all until this point, which might explain some of my ignorance. But so my idea was that as soon as Osquery starts up, it sets up a subscriber then to fill these tables up. But then the act of querying against those events also has some dynamic, like where.
So I think that it starts the subscriber if it sees things in the configuration, right? If I start an Osquery and I don't have anything that's using any events, I don't think it'll start up I think it's a publish.
Run loop. It's a run loop.
Yeah, it won't start it unless it sees that you care about that, right? So either first query or if it's in the config. And I'm a little unsure about like what happens if it comes in through a distributed query. I imagine it would spin it up, but I don't quote me on that.
Yeah, that was my next question, because we are using Fleet, so that also...
Try it and see. Like it'll work or it won't.
I can say that depending on the type of events or publisher, we either have one flag or two flags to enable events, let's say. So for BPF, I believe there is only one right now, because when you enable like the publisher, you can't really. So normally we have two sets of flags: one that enables the publisher, and the other that enables the subscriber. The subscriber is the table receiving the events, which you
So
then
that's the
query.
RocksDB on disk table is a subscriber.
Kinda, yeah, because events are saved on the inside RocksDB until they are queried.
And then as
So
they're
that's
queried, cache will hold some amount of the query results in memory, or is that the?
So no, so the events start from the let's maybe start from the beginning. So the events get taken, read, etc. via system API or BPF API from the publisher. The publisher then processes these events, creates internal generic Osquery events, and sends them to the subscribers subsystem, let's say, which saves them on the database. Then when you query, those are retrieved from the RocksDB database. And depending on the expiration settings, they are then expired, so removed from the RocksDB database. From the query on, those events can also then be transformed to log lines, which are then sent through TLS. And those log lines are normally saved back on the RocksDB database, because if Osquery goes offline, is unable to communicate with the remote, those log lines cannot be sent, so they are kept
Kind of
in there, so
backup.
they can be sent back.
Oh, okay. So that does actually sort of then go back and retry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So there's multiple kind of stages of buffering. So with the event space table, events come in between runs of the query, they get buffered. Then the query runs, that generates log lines, those get buffered. Then on interval, Osquery writes the logs to the TLS server, and then clears the log lines out of the buffer. But you can manage expirations for both of those different buffers. And by default, the event-based tables, when it looks in the events buffer, if you have Osquery in the default configuration, when the event-based table query runs, it will only look at events that are new since the last time that particular query ran. Because maybe your buffer goes back a week, but the query runs every hour or every 5 minutes or something. You don't want to look at the whole week again for that same query. So it'll only look at the newest ones. The reason I bring that up is because when you're running a live query, Osquery doesn't have the notion of when the last time this query ran. So you'll essentially be querying everything that's in that buffer. So I would just say, be aware of that. None of that, if I'm understanding what Alessandro is saying correctly, none of that is going to be connected to this memory issue. My understanding is the memory issue is earlier on in this like pipeline of where the data is flowing at the like publisher subscriber point, and before the point where it gets written to the buffer the first time. And so it's unrelated to the buffering the first time as the events, or the buffering the second time as the logs.
The BPF memory leak is totally separate.
But anyway, I can confirm it's in the BPF implementation is in the publisher, so the issue is inside the publisher itself, which is reading the events.
Zach, you mentioned that distributed queries don't have that last seen tracking, so they'll get basically the full log. That's not true for queries from Osquery I. Osquery I, when running in an event loop, like if you rerun the same query, it tracks the last thing it saw. So I wonder if that's it's what I use to test events usually.
Okay, maybe it does, and possibly I misspoke there. If the SQL is the same, it's been quite some time since I've looked at that.
It might be an interesting thing for a motivated person to dig into.
So there is something going on with the event expiry, which I think we have to correct because it has been changed lately. Something changed. In theory, it has always been like that, but the documentation wasn't totally precise. So the event expiry isn't always respected, like from the user configuration. Right now, what happens is that it automatically, so if you have a scheduled query or multiple scheduled query with different intervals, Osquery will automatically take the highest interval and like multiply it by 3 and doing some other calculation, and basically uses that as an event expiry. So it will basically ignore what you have given unless that is higher, I believe. Well, what you have provided is higher than what has been calculated. Though through the shell, since there's no scheduler running, then your events expiry will be respected. So if you normally give events expiry 1, then at the very first query, every events get expired, and so the next query won't return any old event that have been already queried. So it's not really keeping track of the last time, but it's just expiring then deleting them. So there are other things that we have to investigate.
So it gets complicated as you dig here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say, and I don't know what all comes into play into this, but myself and Zach, we were using in the console Osquery I, and we had events expiry at the default, which I think is 50,000. For the not events expiry, but the record. There's also an events what's it called?
Events max.
Max, yeah, the total record count. Like we were looking at the processes, BPF processes event table, and we would see it at 100,000, 200,000 records, which seemed to exceed the 50,000 default. And I don't know if that's another case where
probably 50,000 per query or per table or something.
Well, yes, and also there is. Recently, this is actually an improvement because how we store events inside the RocksDB database is not anymore as single rows, but as a batch. So technically, that number corresponds to the batch number, which
so I was just
can be variable in size.
At the right number. Okay.
So yeah.
No, you were looking at the right number. We just redefined it.
Oh.
And I think another thing to keep in mind is the events max and the events expiry are applied after the query runs. So before the query runs, the buffer can outgrow the defined size. And when the query runs, then the buffer is truncated. So the idea being, like, you don't want to lose those events. You want to clear them after you've had a chance to query them. So you may see that you've exceeded the expected amount in the buffer, but then that buffer will be cleared at conclusion of the scheduled query.
And one thing I want to just re-harp on is you mentioned doing this in Osquery I. Osquery I is disconnected from your Osquery D. They're almost completely standalone, and they behave subtly different. There is an exception here, which is also worth noting. Everything is so caveated. I'm sorry.
It's all right. No, it's all good. This is beautiful.
Osquery I is, as I said, completely separate from Osquery D. So you aren't even talking to the same RocksDB. You can't. RocksDB is a single. You're only allowed one open file handle on it. The interesting exception here is that there is functionality inside Osquery I to talk to an Osquery D. So you know that Osquery talks over a thrift socket. Maybe not. If you run any extensions.
No, we know that. Part of what we found is that if we have to shut down Osquery D before we run Osquery I, and it sounds like maybe there's
So you can only have one thing talking to a Rocks database at a time. So if you want to inspect your Rocks database with Osquery I or with some other tool, you have to shut down Osquery D. The more common way is like when I run Osquery, I don't point it at the same database because I'm like doing its own thing. So you can run as many as you want. You just can't have databases shared. Osquery communicates with extensions over Thrift, which is a local socket-based thing. And Osquery I can talk to Osquery D over Thrift, acting like any extension would, which means you can run queries over the Thrift socket on an Osquery D. So if you're running Osquery D, you can take any extension that knows how to speak Thrift and query against it, which you can do in Osquery I. It's just a little weird.
So I just linked to a tweet with a video, like short demo of how to use that connect command in Osquery I, which would help you see. It will allow you to have Osquery D continue running, and for Osquery I to be querying the actual database that's available or that's being used by Osquery D.
It's effectively the same as if you were issuing live queries to your Osquery D. It's just you're doing it through an Osquery I shell. And the caveat there is that tab completion will be for what Osquery I thinks your tables are, not for what Osquery D thinks your tables are.
Naturally, yeah.
So it's a little bit of a caveat, but
no, that's helpful because we've been just when we wanted to test queries against just a running system without shutting down Osquery D, we've been just going through Fleet to do that. But if we have an opportunity to just do it,
you can also just spin up an Osquery I directly without any database attached. That would be the usual thing. As said, it's just an API translation layer. So, speaking for myself, I frequently have shell windows open to several operating systems running Osquery I to test queries. But
yeah, and a thing to keep in mind is if you want to start up an Osquery I and you already have an Osquery D running, you'll probably have to specify to use a different database path, PID file path, and is there one more? No, I think
probably just run it with an ephemeral database or no database, but it also depends on like if you don't have it probably is defaulting to reading the configuration file. So if your configuration file isn't an Etsy OS query, then I think it would just be fine. So I don't know. There's a thing there to work through. I don't think it uses a PID file. I might be wrong.
Well, excellent. Yeah, I really appreciate just the sort of general like Osquery 101 type stuff. Because we ended up sort of getting, I think, very deep into all of this to try to figure out the memory usage, and it's been like an eye opener of like how much is going on under the hood. But yeah, good stuff.
Happy to chat about it.
Yeah, so I was just gonna, Zach. Did you have any thoughts or questions? Or
oh no, it was excellent to hear all that.
Nice.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that question to office hours. I think if it wasn't for folks like you bringing questions like that, it would just be the six of us talking about whatever we usually talk about. So it's good to do a little office hours.
Yeah, it's what we're here for. Okay, next up. So we released 5.0, and I was curious if people have seen any issues. I pushed the bare binaries out to the Collide fleets, and I don't think we've seen anything. Seems great. We're also not using endpoint security frameworks or any of the real fancy stuff, or the packaging. I have noticed 3 bugs come by that feel like they might have been related to the packaging. One of them, one's unrelated. There was a request for per platform download links. So these would be things that have stable URLs that don't have the versions embedded in them. So something like osquery.msi instead of just osquery-version number.msi. It looks like at some point we have made these, but not consistently. I think it's a fine feature request. So if someone wants to just kind of update the packaging scripts, I think that's totally reasonable. I don't think this needs anything in the website. This is just going to be in the either code sign or packaging repo. I'm not sure which. The other thing I saw go by was a request, was an observation. So when we moved the path on Linux, we moved it to opt Osquery, and we dropped symlinks into user local. We put the symlinks in the wrong place. On Linux, we should have put them in user. So
Yeah,
oops.
I goofed it up. Sorry.
Me too. So
I'm just used to user local being the path for outside stuff, but
anyhow, that seems like a thing we could fix pretty quickly, and we should do that for 5.1. And then I saw a report saying that the MSI was missing packs, but I did 0 debugging on that. So, I don't know.
So I haven't done any debugging. It's like kind of on my plate to look at, but like nothing really has changed with Windows packaging.
This exists since 4.9, basically.
Okay,
Since we
that
passed to the
explains.
new, we simply forgot
Okay.
to translate the install calls. Well, we left out an install call for the specs. Yeah.
Sounds easy to fix.
Yep.
Have other people seen anything interesting in the 5.0 release?
I pushed out the bare binaries also, and have not heard any issues, and things seem to be running successfully on Orbit. I mean, we're still, I don't get that much, or I don't get any telemetry, except for what people manually call in via Slack to me or to us. And we also, the deployment of Orbit is fairly limited still, as we haven't cut stable release. But the update seems to work, and Osquery seems to work, and we'll look forward to figuring out how to use the app bundle and try out endpoint security through that mechanism.
I don't recall. So there's an additional issue. I don't recall if it specifically came with 5.0, but yeah, there's an issue with launching extensions apparently on Windows where it's not possible to launch them anymore. But yeah, this is something that we might have a look into.
I'll tag it into the milestone for you. Okay, well, sounds like no real comments. That said, it seems like it's been real anticlimactic, so that's sort of great, all things considered.
Yeah, I mean, for a major version release, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, there have been minor issues with like people upgrading from 4.9.
Oh, yeah.
Identifier. I think we talked about it at last office hours about a pre-flight script. I haven't had the time to investigate, but probably seems reasonable for 5.1 or.
I don't think you have a ticket for that, but I'll write it down. Number.
I think we have notes from previous office hours on that.
The other thing someone wanted to talk about, Alessandro, this one's you, is discussing about updating contributor guidelines.
Yeah, so as Stefano was mentioning to me today, I don't think we use blueprints very often for new functionalities, and we usually just use them for like changing behavior of existing things. But I am now realizing not all pull requests are easy to scope when we have to consider them whether they are something that can fit in core or not. And so this is a dump of the things I was thinking about. It's not really structured, but here are the considerations as I was making. So there are tables that just use like system APIs, maybe to acquire system artifacts. I think they're the best candidate for a new table, a new feature, because they are probably something if it is from the system API, it's likely we just want to take it. And we also don't have to rely on external libraries and other complex things. That is not to say that it is bad to make a blueprint, but it is also, it is likely that we are going to accept the feature. Then I was thinking about other kind of features. Sometimes we need a new library, and there has to be some kind of vetting process before we can accept it. Not all libraries are, I think, a good candidate, because Osquery is really different than a tool that you just run once, maybe in a virtual environment, and then you're done with it. And then I was also thinking about custom libraries written for a specific feature where you maybe want to capture something, an artifact that is really useful, but however requires you to write a library for this maybe undocumented format, which is maybe, it's not really hard. Sometimes you can, can do some reverse engineering, you can write the documentation, you can find around. But I'm mostly concerned about the reliability of the library, and also on the maintenance burden. If someone was to write let's say, I don't know, a parser library for NTFS, a custom one, it's kind of a lot to take in. We don't have the maintainers that are experts enough in the NTFS format to just keep it up to date. And eventually it will bitrot and cause security issues. And so I was thinking about adding some additional guidelines. It mostly revolves around assuming Osquery is targeted by someone. Everything you parse is potentially broken, malformed, malicious, in a way that will attempt to exploit Osquery. And so I think it is useful to write some kind of documentation on how this kind of code should be written so that it is secure and we can easily audit it and keep it up to date and secure. But I would also think it is best that whenever we risk getting in this second case where we have to introduce libraries and overwriting parsers, in this case, we should write a blueprint first. Because there are many implications to take into account when we potentially increase the attack surface due to new libraries, dependencies, new custom parsers, and so on. And the reason for the blueprint is mostly because we don't want to waste the contributors' time. We want to make sure that the feature actually has a chance to land. And maybe sometimes the underlying problem can be easily solved in a way that makes the pull request acceptable.
I mean, would the blueprint be kind of almost like a security or reliability audit of the library code?
I would imagine that the blueprint might be like, I want a new NTFS table, and to do that, I need this library. Can I add it? What do you all think about adding this library? And then maybe we look at it and we're like, that library is terrible and we will never add it to core. Or maybe we'll say, oh, we kind of can do that by just adding a couple fields onto our existing library. So maybe it's a security evaluation, or maybe it's just the beginning of a conversation.
Yeah. So I want to make a practical example for the. We have the TSK library, and we have a pull request that uses it to parse. It attempts to find registry hives. Now, the way the code is currently implemented scans all the devices on the system, parsing the partition table and the NFS system. So the first problem I can see is that an external user doesn't even have to turn on the monitor or log into the system, can just take a USB key, connect it to the computer or a CD-ROM, and then if that query happens to run, it will get untrusted input from a random user. And not having a way to, we don't have a way to sandbox certain features in Osquery yet. So I think we have to be careful in what kind of code we are introducing.
So this has two questions for me. One of them is, can we bring in sandboxing? What would it be like to add sandboxing? And the other one that I know I've asked a few times is like, there are third-party libraries to aid in parsing. What would it take for us to evaluate and decide one of them is trustworthy? Would it end up reducing the burden in terms of the libraries we're pulling in?
So I believe it is not that common in Osquery to write a full-blown custom parser for, like, I don't know, an NTFS, for example. So it is certainly useful to have a good parsing library if we have a good use case. But right now, I'm not seeing a use case that makes it reasonable to import those libraries. And again, a custom library means that someone has to maintain it. If it is undocumented, it's going to be really hard. And yeah, if we have anything like that, it is best to have a good coverage with unit test and even fuzzing.
Do you have any thoughts about whether we can bring sandboxing in?
We're going to have to evaluate that. Every system is really different, and we also have some, like, the easiest way is to just fork, but we have rules against it. So I believe we have to take a good look at it and write down a blueprint and see what everyone thinks about it.
Well, some of Stefano's work with container namespaces forks, right?
Yeah.
I think some of the... So I'm always wary of forking for a couple of reasons. One of them is that, like, I don't like shelling out to stuff, and sometimes forking is just a way of saying we don't want to shell out to stuff. I always find that very error prone. And as you start getting really fork heavy, you start running into failure unloaded systems. Like, the system resource utilization is different. Like, I don't know if you've ever encountered, machines that won't let you spin up new processes because they're horked in one way or another.
Yeah, it's not fun.
So, like, if every query went through a sandbox that required a fork, Osquery would stop working. But I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it's reasonable to say, just like we said, no, it's okay to fork to read Docker. Maybe we'd say, yeah, we should always fork when we read like this class of file. Like I wouldn't want to write off that solution entirely.
But it also pollutes the event stream if you're capturing system calls and things like that. That's another reason I think we were avoiding it.
Yeah, for the containers. So there specifically, there wasn't really any. Well, also for sandboxing, but there wasn't really any other way to do that. You must fork. Also, although it's not the default due to watchdog reasons, it is possible that you only fork once, and then that fork handles all your queries. But currently, it's not enabled because there are a couple of improvements we really have to do on the watchdog side, especially in its ability of tracing other processes, which are still Osquery processes. And so, yeah, that will be probably the same also for the sandbox, I believe. It will be, ideal to have that ability from the watchdog. Like similar to extensions, basically. Yeah.
Well, and I guess the other challenge with the forking model is that you'd have to ensure that the forked process has the appropriate privileges to access the data that we wanted to access, but no more in order to actually provide some benefit for the sandboxing.
Or you'd like have to put the read in one privileged thread and do the processing in another. Yeah. So what do you think the next steps are here, Alessandro? Like, I think probably most of us agree with the broad strokes you're outlining. So where do you want to take it?
I think we're going to make a pull request to update the guidelines.
Sounds
and
great.
I will probably just annoy Mike until what I wrote becomes readable in proper English.
That's what I'm here for.
I think that's a great idea, and we can continue the discussion there. I mean, guidelines are, and I always think that guidelines are the easiest possible step we can take, and we will probably spend the future years building, the best sandboxing that we can and that kind of thing. But we can probably make guidelines pretty quickly and get some benefit immediately.
Well, I'd say this differently, which is that irrespective of whether we have sandboxing, there is value in updating our guidelines to match what our current thinking is. So we should absolutely do that. And I think there is also value in sandboxing because in many ways Osquery does live in a hostile environment. So the better we can do with that, the better we can be.
Totally.
So we have a really cool new pull request from a user that is implementing a support for embedding additional files into the packaging. And Seth did mention, it was just an idea, but having a forensic extension for Osquery. Implementing sandboxing there will be easier as it is a external different process.
It's an interesting thought. That might be something for us to chew on. It still has to run with permissions, though.
That is true, but given that it is something we would write from scratch, it would be easier. Like we could obtain the handles from it and then drop all the privileges we don't need anymore.
And if you went full in on Linux, you could imagine systemd capabilities, very specific capabilities for the extension, not running with full root permissions.
Yeah.
If people are interested in, I have some interest in getting, so you mentioned that PR about sort of changing the packaging around. I think it would be good to get that one merged if we can. I don't know that I can review it. Let's see. Let me see what I can say about that PR.
I think Charville already looked into it.
Which PR?
The one that that updates the packaging to include support for embedding custom files in the package.
Do you have the link handy?
I'm looking for it. In the packaging repo?
Yeah, right. It's there.
No, there's nothing open in the packaging repo.
No, it's in Osquery because it's the install directives. So it's
Oh yeah, the
73
custom
15.
installation. I think it looks good. There were a few small changes which they have updated, and I think someone gave them CI runner access too, so that runs and it passes. I think I can say it looks good, and someone can finally approve it.
Yeah, if you sign off on it, then one of us can go through the rest of the dance. So as the username on the submitter implies, this is the first PR from a large company that now has permission to contribute more. So
I think this is the second from
the
fruit company. Yeah,
maybe so. They've had a couple.
It was a documentation PR.
Oh yeah, and they contributed to the Go library as well, the Go SDK. But this person has just been onboarding there, and I was chatting with them, and they said they'd be trying to get more things in. So I always have some interest in making it easy for them. More things, always better. We're about at time. That's everything I had written down. I don't know if anyone's got any parting questions or comments.
But it's some easy PRs to approve at the end of the agenda. Yeah. We could take this as action items for after, but they're sitting there.
Yeah, I haven't made a pass on our PRs. I'll mention that I discovered that we don't work with modern Linux IB tables, so that was unfortunate.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know?
We need to... Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, just saying. Yeah, I wonder if it is either supporting CentOS 6 or supporting newer distro versions. But yeah, I think the original issue is that we still support CentOS 6. So.
I don't know. So the IP tables issue is that NetFilter moved the implementation to something new, and I just don't think we link to the right libraries.
Yeah, but that's the point. If we have to support CentOS 6, can we link the new libraries? Can we have both implementations and make it work on the older and newer? Yeah, that's just say we have to check.
I don't know.
Is it EB tables?
NP tables. And I don't actually remember the name of the library. The library is something else. And the library's documentation is the string quote to do, close quote, C git. So fun times. I noticed that. I also noticed, and I haven't made a test case for this, I have a couple of machines in the extended Collide fleet that report multiple things mounted on /, and I don't know what to make of that yet.
I've seen similar recently as well.
Yeah, maybe. So I think the one I saw might be an artifact of how Red Hat treats some mounts, but I haven't made a test case, so I don't know if you know anything.
Could be because of Lux DM mapper.
No, it doesn't smell Lux related. It's like there's an XFS file system and also a root FS file system, both mounted on /, and I don't know if that's real or just an artifact of like how the data is in mtab and how we're parsing it or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, the mtab has some duplicated keys, let's say, that point to the same thing.
Yeah, something like so. I haven't debugged this at all. I just noticed it. I don't think it's Osquery's fault. I think the underlying data is probably weird, and maybe we can figure out the right way to parse it. But that's my guess. What other? I found another ridiculous bit of Linux recently. I've just forgotten. I'm sorry. But IP tables is slightly more annoying.
Do you happen to know when it stops working?
When what stops working?
The IP tables.
Depends entirely on the OS, is what I can tell you. I can say that Ubuntu Here Suite, HIR, whatever the new Ubuntu is, Ubuntu H, does not ship the legacy IP tables. Okay, so for background, years ago, IP tables, NetFilter rewrote from IP tables to NP tables, like 5 years ago at this point. But everyone has been shipping the NP tables in legacy mode, which still preserves all the IP tables proc and interfaces and all of that. And the very recent Linuxes, so I see this on the newest Ubuntu and I see this on Fedora, have started shipping in NP mode. So they've dropped the legacy IP tables interfaces. And I don't know if there's any official announcements. I don't know like what expected behavior is. I just know that some of the machines I'm seeing drop support for that. I did a tiny bit of experimenting. So the way we actually do this is we look at a proc file system to see what the tables in play are, and then we iterate on the, what the filter names in play are, then we iterate on the filter names through an API call. Manually defining the filter names doesn't change anything, so I think the actual library, is the kernel APIs are all different or something. We need a different library for it. And a thing I don't know the answer to, maybe other people have thoughts, is whether we would want to convert IP tables to using NP tables or have a different NP tables thing that presented things in the preferred NP tables format instead of the preferred IP tables format. So here be dragons.
Yeah, maybe we can just try to map the ranges of distributions we are support right now that are using either of the two. And then maybe if it makes sense to try to implement both.
It's the kind of thing where, like Windows 11, it's coming. So there's no real choice, right? Like, we want to work on Linux and have meaningful data, we're going to change. The other thing is we've started seeing reports that the DM crypt table does not correctly display what is now a common setup, where if someone uses Lux to encrypt a raw disk and then layers LVM on top of that, Osquery does not correctly report on that.
Yeah, I think we haven't updated that code in a really long time, and
I don't think it's the code. So I looked at this a little bit, and we have all of this weird. Our disk encryption stuff is like really heavily based on block devices, which is like based on mounts. So there's this to even figure out.
And I mean, I also kind of want to rip apart like HFS stuff that has been there since like 2015. Back then, APFS wasn't a thing. But I think we probably need to look at the underlying library. It hasn't been updated in a while, so. I remember looking at this like a really long time ago, but
my guess is that the library would correctly detect it, but that we're not even asking the right question, because we're probably like saying root is LVM-root. Is LVM-root encrypted? And the answer is no. And then we stop traversing up the tree because we see that that's a partition. Like we see the LVM volume as a partition, and we don't ask if the underlying disk is encrypted. I haven't traced it enough, but I did a little bit in there. So there's some real weirdness in that code. Anyhow, that's my Linux excitement for the extra couple minutes.
Do we have an issue for the IP tables regression?
I made an issue for the IP tables thing. Yes. You could look for it.
Yeah.
Um,
Let me see.
73, 23.
NF tables, not NP tables, excuse me. Yeah, I don't have much to say other than it no work.
Hmm.
So, anyhow, anything else? If not, nice to see everyone. Have a good week. And oh yeah, Hacktoberfest is like real soon now. So maybe we'll see some PRs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye all.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.